Michael O'Hanlon joins us from the Brookings Institute. We always turn to Michael to help us feel better, or sometimes worse, about situations going on around the world. But we got to know. That's the point. We have to know. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. Nice to be with you.
Thanks for being on. We heard the news cycle being what it is. We heard that China and Russia were running some sort of military test operation drill off the coast of Alaska. And we were getting ships there to secure the area, air there to secure the area. Now there's nothing. What do we know?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because this is one that has to be unpacked a little. What they did is not horrible. They were in international waters. They did not apparently violate U.S. territorial waters or airspace. They therefore have the exact same right to do this that we always claim when we're operating near their coast, which we do routinely, and I think we should keep doing. But if we're going to do that, we've got to and invoke international law to justify it. We've got to be prepared for them doing this back to us. Mm-hmm. What I don't like is China cooperating with Russia at this kind of a time. And I think that's where Beijing should have better sense, not be so tone deaf, not be enabling Vladimir Putin and his aggression, even indirectly. The good news is China's still not sending Russia any weapons. And China joined this peace conference a few days ago in Saudi Arabia that did not include Russia, but did include Ukraine, and was designed to set forth principles for any future peace agreement that included things like territorial sovereignty that would, be what Ukraine wants. And so China's done some things that are better than others, but the actual sailing of these ships was not a violation of any international law or any American prerogative. So in my broader scheme of things, it's not a big deal.
It's something, though, that I feel like the Biden folks missed the opportunity to address again. That being, we are taking this up with both governments in whatever relationship we have with Russia at this point, though I know it's very limited. But let's move to Ukraine, because you brought up Ukraine, and I think we should keep talking about Ukraine. It does become background noise, and that's unfortunate. We still spend a tremendous amount of money there, and it remains, in my view, vital that we do, because you can call it a proxy war, you can call it whatever you want, but we cannot let Ukraine fall to the Russians, no matter how damaged the Russian effort may be. True? Not true?
Well, I agree with you, but I think we still are going to have a full-throated debate. And obviously, there's some Americans who don't agree with us, and it's largely Trump Republicans or far-left Democrats. But I think that by next summer or so, maybe sooner, we will see a broader part of this country asking the question, tell me how this ends. The famous Dave Petraeus question from Iraq, but that also can now be applied to this war, because we see that the Ukrainian offensive is not making that much headway. Now, you could blame that on the Biden administration being slow to provide tanks and not yet having given F-16s or longer range missiles. And we'll probably have that debate this winter. What else should we give them? What other kind of higher technology stuff should we give them? And they'll try again next year. This is my prediction. And then they will make a little more progress, but still nowhere near what they want and what they're frankly entitled to, because it's, their territory that's being occupied by Russia. But then we'll be at a place where somewhere in the middle of the presidential campaign next year in this country, we're going to be wondering what our strategy should be. And I hope it doesn't boil down to a debate of whether to cut Ukraine off entirely and leave them at the mercy of the Russian wolves, or whether it's to just keep doing on autopilot what we've been doing. At that point, we may need a little bit of a more nuanced strategy that says to Ukraine, we'll never leave you in the lurch, but we are not really of the view you can win back all your territory militarily. And you're going to have to start thinking about, leaving it to a longer term diplomatic effort to try to get back those pieces of land you can't win back. And we'll keep supporting you, but we think you have to consider those kinds of options. I'm not sure it's the moment to do that yet, but I expect that debate may happen next year.
There's two money questions that jump from what you just talked about. One is, where's the support from other countries? Is that underreported? Does it exist? And could the other Western powers do more?
I'm really glad you asked, because the other countries are doing just as much as we are, and that has not gotten out. In fact, President Trump's been misportraying this, and he needs to go back and do his homework. He's a smart guy. He's usually better with numbers than he is on this one, because we've done the math at Brookings, and the Europeans collectively are doing even more than we are when you count all the refugee assistance they've provided. Even if you don't count that, because they're hosting about 5 million refugees from Ukraine and providing for them and helping them resettle. But even if you don't count the $50 billion in refugee resettlement costs, the Europeans collectively have spent about the same that we have. They've just given more of their aid in financial and humanitarian terms. We've given more of our aid in military terms. The really impressive thing is how much we're all doing together. We've stayed together since early last year. We've given collectively about $250 billion in combined assistance to Ukraine. Getting back to your earlier point, that's probably not sustainable at that level indefinitely, politically, although economically, it's still a far lower rate of expense than we had when we were fighting wars ourselves in Iraq and Afghanistan. But, the Europeans and the Canadians have been quite generous, as have the Japanese. And it's really an impressive team effort.
There is no question there was corruption in the Ukrainian government, and there may well be corrupt elements in that government. Having said that, I've seen no evidence of that in regards to the amount of money we're spending and people keeping it, as opposed to the effort in Afghanistan, where we know people were stealing millions and millions of dollars with a country with no central banking system, and we were shipping in pallets of cash. One of the main arguments against being involved in Ukraine is the money is going to a corrupt nation, and this corrupt country is spending it willy-nilly, however they choose. It seems to be a no-win here because in the middle of fighting a war, I don't think accounting is going to be the number one concern by Zelensky and his people, though they owe us some numbers. What do you know at Brookings? Is there something we're missing there?
It's a great question. I do think that we need to keep tightening up oversight. However, I'm not as worried about there being a huge problem as you are. There certainly was, and I'm sure still is, in Ukraine since its independence in the early 90s. And it was seen as one of the more corrupt places to try to do business throughout all of Europe. But what's impressive to me about this $250 billion that we've collectively sent Ukraine in the last year and a half between Europe, Japan, the United States, Canada, that money has arrived where it's supposed to. It's allowed the Ukrainians to fend off a much bigger Russian military successfully for the most part. It's allowed them to keep their economy ginning along, their schools and hospitals open. I am impressed at how well they are using their available resources on balance. It's still not to say I'm not disagreeing with you. I think we do need to ask them to keep improving accountability. And if they have any aspirations for successful reconstruction once this is over, they're really going to need the oversight at that point, because then all the old forces that you mentioned really could kick in again, and the money could wind up going to the wrong places. This was not a successful country economically prior to the war, but they have really upped their game in their performance as a nation since then. So I'm relatively confident on that front for at least the moment and for this war effort.
Yeah, and until I hear differently, and it could be a great surprise, and frankly, I hope it never happens. Zelensky is one of the great political stories of my lifetime. Take somebody totally. Who, people had no necessary confidence in, who was the, quote, comedian who became the president. I think he's just been a flat-out hero, and I hope he stays that.
Absolutely. And I had the good fortune of meeting him last September in Kyiv and then interviewing him in an off-the-record conference this summer in Idaho, but he piped in by Zoom. And he's just amazing. I mean, he also maintains a certain positivity and a hopefulness. I mean, obviously, he's very riveted on defeating the Russians, on staying alive, on keeping his countrymen alive. But he also manages to inspire, and he manages even to have an ironic sense of gallows humor at times, and a connectedness with people, even as he's speaking over Zoom from 10,000 miles away. So I've just really been impressed, like you. And, the question is, how long can he keep this going? How long can his fellow Ukrainians maintain their stiff upper lip in the face of such horrible tragedy? So that question is still open, but so far, yeah, he's been amazing.
Michael O'Hanlon, Director of Research, Senior Fellow of the Foreign Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. Read everything you can that Mr. O'Hanlon and his colleagues at Brookings do. You'll be smarter for it. And it's a good balanced view of what truly is happening. We appreciate the work and always appreciate your time.
Thank you, kind sir. You too.
All right, take care. That's Michael.